Okay, we're going to talk today about interpreting graphs. Interpreting graphs is a pretty easy section. Actually, it's one of the more interesting concepts in Algebra 1, if there is such a thing. I got to learn how to spell. Okay, interpreting graphs. When you think about the word interpret, it basically means to analyze or to figure out or to understand. Okay, so interpreting graphs, if we give a definition to the word interpreting graphs would be it'd be the analyzing so it'd be to analyze graphical data in order to figure out what has happened or what will happen. So that's basically the gist of interpreting graphs. Alright, so let's just jump right into it. So here's our first example. We're going to deal primarily, when we're talking about interpreting graphs, we're going to deal with single quadrant graphs. So the first thing I want to do is I want to do a completely generic graph. So let's say we have a graph that looks like this, then it looks like this, and it goes down, and it goes up fast, and then it goes here. Now, what I mean by a generic graph is I didn't label anything here or here. So I don't have any information to put on there. What I want to do is I want to kind of come up with a story. So right now I want you to pause the video for just a second, and I want you to try to figure out if you can tell a story based on this graph. Okay, hopefully you paused it and you kind of brainstormed a little bit. Probably not, but that's fine. So let's just try to interpret this graph. So let's just say that this particular axis right here represented time. And this particular axis represented speed. Okay? So if this is a speed versus time graph, then let's talk about what this graph is telling us. Right here, it's telling us that as the time increases, so from here to here, looking at this section right here, so right here, as the time increases, okay, the speed increases, right? So what's happening here is the time is increasing and the speed is increasing. So you can say that over this time, you're going faster. Okay? So from this time, from this beginning time to this time, and this beginning time is 0 because it starts with 0 speed. So beginning time, for that little segment, the speed is increasing. Okay? So what's happening from here to here then? Well, from here to here, the speed, notice the speed, the time is increasing, but the speed is not changing. It's staying the same. So that means that for that particular time, the car or the person or whatever is traveling at a constant speed. Okay? So, for example, here, let me go back to the first segment again. I may have started off at 0 miles per hour, and then by here I might be at 30 miles per hour. Well, if I'm at 30 miles per hour at the end of that segment, and my speed did not increase at the end of that second segment, I should also be at 30 miles per hour. Okay? So then what happens from here to here? Okay? As my time increased, my y decreased. Okay? So that means as my time increased, my speed decreased. So that means I am slowing down in that segment. I'm slowing down. There's my decrease right there. Now notice, I'm not slowing down to 0. I might be, if that's 30 miles per hour, I might be slowing down to about 10 miles per hour. I didn't slow all the way down to a stop. I just slowed down 10 miles per hour or 20 miles per hour or so. Okay? So, what's happening from here to here again? Well, again, my time is increasing. My speed is increasing. So for this particular section, I'm speeding up. And in this case, I sped up to faster than 30 miles per hour. So maybe now I'm at 60 miles per hour. And again, there's no specific times on here, so it's hard to say for sure. Okay? Now, I added this last part in here, and it's a little more, I'm going to kind of try to neaten it up a little bit. It's a little different. Then I'm going to add another section, okay? Notice I have a little curve in my graph here. So if we're looking at this last section here, so from here to here, notice there's a little curve. So what's happening? Well, what that's telling you is from here to here, I'm basically going 60 miles per hour. But now I'm slowly increasing, so I increased a little bit. Maybe I increased to 63. Then I increased a little faster from here to here, so maybe I increased to 68. So now I stayed at constant speed for a second, increased a little bit, increased a little faster. Okay, so there's a different variation of increasing there. I stayed constant, I increased at a slow rate, and then I increased at a little bit quicker rate. Okay, so let's look at the last segment. On this last segment, what happens from here to here? Notice that my time barely moved, but my speed dropped fast. If I'm driving a car, what do you think happened? Could have slammed on the brakes right there, right? Slammed on the brakes to a complete stop. That would be a good interpretation of what happened. So basically what I did is I took a graph, and I'm going to write over this one now. I took this graph right here, and I analyzed it. I broke it down piece by piece to tell the story of what happened. So that way now, if I wanted to tell a story, because a lot of times when I'm talking about interpreting graphs, I talk about teaching or telling a story. So now if I want to tell a story, what I can say is I got in my car. Obviously, I started it up. It was going 0 miles per hour. I stepped on the gas, and I increased at a constant rate of about 30 miles until I got to 30 miles per hour. So maybe I increased at a rate of 5 miles per hour until I finally got to 30 miles per hour here. Once I hit 30 miles per hour, I was in a school zone. So I stayed at 30 miles per hour. Then I came upon a stop sign. Not a stop sign. I came upon a curb. So I slowed down to my curve so I could turn right here. Then once I got around the curve, I was going on a straight way that I could go 60. So I increased my speed at a relatively constant rate. So that I could get up to 60 here. Then I was at 60 and a car passed me, so I was a little frustrated, so I sped up a little bit to 63. Well, then that car sped up, so then I gunned it a little bit to 68. Then that car was in front of me, and he got mad, slammed on his brakes, so I slammed on my brakes, so I had to come back to a complete stop. So that's a story I can tell just from looking at the data, just from looking at a table. Again, remember, I started, if you go back to the very beginning of this video, I started with just the lines on a graph. And I told that story by looking at the graph. I don't have a piece of paper where I read the story. Nobody told me that story. I just created that story on my own. So that's basically the gist of interpreting graphs. Okay? We're going to do this on a regular basis. All right, I'm going to show you a couple of examples, and I want to talk about this when we come to class on Friday, but I want to show you a couple of examples, and I want you to come up with a story. And so part of your homework today is I'm going to give you 3 examples of a graph, and I want you to tell me a story about the graph, and I'm going to get some of you to share your story, or I'm going to have all of you turn it in so that I can go over and see what your thoughts are in interpreting graphs. Okay, so let's look at another example. So let's say I give you a graph that looks like this. Okay, let's say that this represents time, and this is example 2. This represents time, this axis, and this represents distance. Tell me a story about that. You create a story and tell me a story about that. Okay, let's look at another one. This is example 3. Whoops, that wasn't very straight, was it? Okay. Let's say our graph looks like this. Okay. And then it stays here. Let's say that this graph represents time. Or this, I'm sorry, axis represents time. And this axis represents excuse me. This axis represents the height. It represents height. Height. Okay, how tall something is. Tell me a story about that. Let's do one more example. And this time I'm going to give you a little more freedom. I'm going to call this axis time. I'm going to let you choose your choice of what this axis represents. Tell me then, what does this graph represent? All right. We'll talk more about that at the very beginning of class tomorrow. Have you turn in those papers. Just write on a separate sheet of paper all of your interpretations of those graphs. Turn them in when you come in, and we'll talk a little bit about it, and then we'll do our interpreting graphs activity. So there is actually one more short video after this one. It's just the instructions on our interpreting graphs activity, so that I don't have to show you in class, and it won't be a burden when it comes to class time. All right. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. If you have any questions, please let me know.